And then it was having correlations in my business. And I wound up having a conversation with my technical support supervisor, and we were talking about, like, reasons people call in, and a lot of it was because of discrepancies on reports that turned out to be not discrepancies on reports at all, but all the time we were constantly spending. And, I asked her, how bad is this issue? And she's like, it's like, I mean, how many times a day do people call in? And she's like, it's almost a constant thing. Like,
Wow.
sometimes it's at least one call a day from people saying these types of things. So then, me correlating what was going on with Mandela effects and then I'm like, could this actually affect data as well? And then I started doing some investigating, and, like, for the example of the Haas avocado, I knew how it was. I knew it was HAAS, and we would do. I would personally do these product demonstrations. Some of them I would do for years, and I had this particular invoice that always had Haas avocados as the last item. So I was always seeing that every time I gave a demonstration of the software. I'd always see the HAAS avocados on there. So what was happening was, to make a long story short, when we actually went back to the hard copy invoices, they all changed to Haas. And I'm like, wait, no way. The data's like the actual data, like, then it became an epiphany.
Sure.
So data actually changed. So when this timeline got merged in, or however exactly this works, all of the data that came with it, changed as well. So, and even customers, their invoices all changed from HAAS to HASS. And so it became like another missing link as to how all this works and how this operates in our reality.
Sure. So now, before it affected your business, were you seeing it in your personal life, like in your surroundings or anything like that?
Yeah, it started for me actually, it was 2013. I think it was March. And at that time, one of my sons was 3, and I would read him the Berenstain Bears like every night. We had like 20 of the books. And one night I pulled it off the shelf, and I'm looking at the title, and it says Berenstain Bears. And I'm like, oh, I never realized they misprinted this title. And then I happened to look at all the other books, and it was Berenstain. I took another book off the shelf, Berenstain, like Berenstain. It didn't make any sense to me. And my first thought was that somebody broke into the house and actually replaced all my books, all the Berenstain books, with misprinted books, because I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, and it's hard to wrap your brain around that kind of a alteration like that when it's something so physical like that.
Yeah, and I was kind of a book nerd too. Like, I would always read him the introduction of the books. I would, so it was always by Jan, and her husband Stan Berenstain wrote the books. And now it changed to something different. It was Jan and her son wrote the books. And I'm like, the whole introduction changed as well. Wow. So, but at that time, back in 2013, we were doing this big software release. We're going from one major version to another major version, and my brain was fried, and there's so many things going on. So I'm like, I literally put it on the shelf.
Sure.
And then the next thing that hit me, this is going back, like, into the future, into 2017, was the JFK assassination. Because I had some friends over, and we were talking about, I think Trump was supposed to be releasing some new info about the JFK assassination. So I was like, oh yeah, I wanted to show you guys something on frame 237 of the Zapruder film, because I knew it pretty well. And then when I went to bring it up, I'm like, this isn't the film. Like, that's not the car. Like, who are these extra people in the car? Like, all those details were completely different. So I thought it was just one person that made like a homemade spoof video. So I started looking everywhere, like, but every video was the same exact video. And I'm like, is this April Fool's? Like, what's going on? It's like really weird. And then I saw when I was Googling it, I saw JFK assassination Mandela Effect. And I'm like, what the hell is this Mandela Effect? And then they were talking about the Berenstain Bears. And I'm like, That I, experienced that myself as well. So it was the Berenstain Bears and the JFK that kind of set me off into beginning to understand, piece together. I'm still in the process of understanding it all, but piecing together what's happening with timelines, et cetera.
Oh wow, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of crazy. I mean, that's one of the things with me and my wife. I'm affected now with my business, with the company I work for, which is kind of a pain in the ass because we're always getting work coming back in from these weird alterations and changes that we normally wouldn't make. But for both my wife and I mean, we're affected going back, in noticing weird things almost to 2009, 2010 ish.
Ooh,
So
okay.
that's where I did. If you look at any of my the first videos I did, where I kind of started to draw a correlation to believing that there's a lot of people that say CERN has no hand in it or is not capable of having a hand in it, but a lot of the real noticing extreme weirdness occurred right around the same time as they turned on that particle accelerator. I mean, one of the other things too is, as I knew back in the day with CERN, we had one particle collider. But now, if you look it up, there's like 300-400 particle colliders all around the world. That just happens to be the largest one.
Yeah.
So,
and they want to build a bigger one, right? And China wants to build an even bigger, huger one. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So, I mean, there's been a lot of crazy things. I've done, I don't know, I've done probably a couple dozen videos over the last couple of years here. I'm just talking about different things that we observe. I mean, we've had time slip issues, where we were driving south heading home one night, and the end of that road, it kind of like turns into almost like a dead end where you got to go left or right. And, we were about half a mile from hitting that end, and I'm looking over at my clock, and it was like 12:04 or 12:05 or something like that. And I looked up, and like our surroundings were completely different. And I kind of freaked out for a minute because I was like, did I doze off or something? What the hell's going on? I look over at my wife, and she's looking at me weird too, going, it's like, did we like just teleport somewhere? So she's like, well, yeah. And I'm like, because it took us a few minutes to actually gather our thoughts and recognize where we were. We actually instantly, and it was like the same minute on the clock, we moved almost 3 miles east down the street and a half a mile south.
Wow.
Still near the house. It was totally trippy. I was like, we haven't noticed it happening again, but it literally happened with both of us. And I've had things like that happen before and just always equated it to, I got so much stuff going on. I'm an engineer during the day. So I'm like, I got between that and the house, and I'm so busy that I just I equated it to zoning out. But it may have been happening, the same teleportation thing. And I don't think it's a teleportation. I don't think we're doing some David Copperfield thing. I think, and she agrees with me, that what we're really doing is we're passing through and moving through different realities. And in reality A, where we were driving south, we were at the location we were at. Well, in reality B, we were 3 miles down the road. So what we did is I think our consciousness is what's shifting.
Yes.
We're not physically shifting. We're consciousness. Yes. That's why you're seeing it, and you've been looking into Mandela effects, and you're seeing all the physical changes to the body. We have on the outer ring of our eyes now, they're dark. We have the dark rings, most of us again. Right. Some people have hexagon pupils, right, which is crazy. There's a whole bunch of different skull changes and that. And I'm not in the medical field, so I don't personally know, but I have a couple people that I talk to on channels that have talked about it. Yeah. And we have businesses where we drive around all the time. One day a business is up and running, next day it's completely changed. The big one for me that was really, really weird was Men's Warehouse and the spelling of it.
Okay.
Stop. Sorry, I got 3 dogs in here. So
no problem.
Yeah. But yeah, Men's Warehouse has been bugging me since probably, I think I noticed that one changing right around 2012, maybe 2013, the physical sign on it. And when I looked it up, nope, the spelling has always been the way that it is right now. Like warehouse, like clothing wear, which actually makes sense, but it used to be like a storage warehouse.
Right.
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 That was a big thing for me. And yeah, we have shifts all the time. We have a church right down the street that now, and I could even send you photos. Now it's got a lighted cross in the front of it.
Okay.
Never did. And we never saw them constructing it, never saw them putting it up. We were just driving by one day at night, and all of a sudden you see this huge, huge glow of light, and we're like, what the hell is going on over there? Now it's got this big lighted cross in front of it. So yeah, we have tons and tons of stuff like that. My wife, and you'll see this if you go back and look at any of my videos. My videos are all about half an hour-ish long, but my wife has got 2 piercings in her ears now. Like, I mean, I've got my ears double pierced, but I just recently did that. But
Okay.
she's always only ever had the bottom earring in. Now she has like it's closed, but she has the closed lump on the back of her ear and a hole in the front.
Oh,
Second set of piercings, which she's never had. So,
interesting.
and that's what kind of reconfirmed it for her that she's not in her own physical vessel, because how could her ears all of a sudden change? You know, and I hear people talking on the religious side of it, talking about, well, it's just our reality, and some are saying, well, it's our reality is changing, and some are saying, well, no, just the veil is being lifted, so now we're actually seeing all these things. But that doesn't account for, like I was saying, the lateral shifting in position of location. It doesn't account for certain things with building total being redesigned and reconstructed seemingly overnight.
Right.
Huh? Or different colors. Yeah, it's kind of weird. I mean, it's a whole bunch of crazy stuff. And we're out here, we're in, I think I told you, I'm out in Gilbert, Arizona.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, you position wise compared to where you're up in Connecticut, right?
I'm in Connecticut, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're thousands of miles apart, yet we're all having these same effects.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. What's funny too is how they can go back and forth. So in 2017, my girlfriend at the time, she always was dismissive of these things. So one of the Mandela effect that came up for me at the time was the Flintstones, because I always remember the Flintstones being spelled like Flint, like Flint, like you make fire from Flint, and it made sense. And she's like, no, it's Flintstones. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. But when she showed me all this evidence, it was always Flintstones. So I'm like, you know, we had this big argument about it. And it lasted for like 2 or 3 days. I mean, how bad can an argument be about the Flintstones? But it was dramatic enough. So a few days later, I was doing a sales presentation, and I had to drive up to Albany, New York with one of my sales guys. And we're driving back home, and I'm mentioning to him about this big argument I had with my girlfriend about the Flintstones, which he thought it was funny. And he's looking on his phone, and he goes, Chris, you're right. It's Flint. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, look, and he shows me everything that he brought up on Google had it the way I remember it now. I almost crashed the car. So as soon as I get home, I'm like, her name was Suzanne. I'm like, Suzanne, guess what's happened with the Flintstones? And she's like, what? I'm like, why don't you Google it and see how it's spelled? And she was just, she didn't have any explanation for it, and her whole thing was, don't worry about it, science is going to answer these questions for us. And I'm like, it already has. It says you're confabulating, you know, you're misremembering. So, but it's funny, my point is well, 2 points: how they can go back and forth sometimes, and then how some people are just not ready for it. It's almost like they're Agent Smith from the Matrix. You must conform to this reality regardless of what you feel. Yeah. So how they can go back and forth as well was also was very interesting as well.
Yeah. So in line with what you're saying about the where it seems like my experience and my wife's experience, we know people that I'll just say the term flip flop. They're not really flip flopping, but they are aware of the changes around. And this happened with our oldest son, actually. We went through the whole Star Wars things. I mean, things that he's into, like the movies, like the Star Wars things, Lord of the Rings changes and things like that. And my wife, it's kind of like the old trap that we do to people, right? You ask them a question, they tell you the way we all remember it, and then you say, nope, go grab the movie and look it up. And my wife's done that to him 100 times. And he's just like, oh, it's just, mismemories from people misquoting it over the years. See, he was at first, when we first brought it up to him, he really seriously looked into it. And he was kind of in agreement with us. And then now he's slipped into just thinking it's confabulation and it's just mismemory, which is kind of sad for us. But I noticed that with a lot of people that go that direction, where they might start looking at it and then they bounce back. I think there's 2 reasons. One is they're just worried about how they come across in the social environment in general. These people more worry about it. I have zero filter. So forgive me sometimes, you know. And I'm hoping we have more conversations because I love talking to people about this stuff. But I don't care what people think about me.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Yeah.
And I never have for a really long time. So me putting myself out there with my videos, it was like, look, this stuff is going on. It's going on long enough where my wife and I have been now having tons of conversations. These things are starting to change so often. I'm like, I just need to start putting it out there. I don't care repercussions, what happens to it.
Right.
And with our son, you know, like I said, he just don't even want to hear about it anymore. Now, do we feel he's a different conscious, that maybe we moved into a different universe where it's a different conscious of him? Perhaps. But he does talk about how he remembers everything, like us all having the conversations back years ago. He just now doesn't want anything to do with the Mandela effect. So, and then I think there's those people who are just, I don't know, they're new souls, or they're just in the system and they just don't shift and don't see what's going on, or don't want to accept it.
Yeah, I also think that when I go deeper into this, I also feel that everybody has set a wake-up date for themselves. So if you go into like the concept of spirituality, there's the concept of you have a higher self who's kind of like in control of your experience in this hologram. And when you incarnated, you said, okay, I'm going to stay in the system. I'm not going to start waking up until I'm 24 years old, you know, or something like that. Sure. So I think, because it could be damaging, or it could be taking away from the experience that consciousness wants to have. So I think that's another part of it too. Some people are just, they will wake up, they're just not ready to wake up yet. And then when they are ready, then everything will start click, click, click. Everything falls into place.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on as far as the shifting and the reality changes and all the weirdness? Do you feel that it is extremely a new effect thing only happening now within our lifetime, or do you, being as you're thinking about the conscious and reincarnation thought process and waking up and becoming aware, or do you think this is something that perhaps since the beginning of our planet, whatever the shape of our planet is, has occurred?
I believe it's something. I believe it's something that's been there for a hell of a long time, and that we're in a special time so that we're becoming more aware of it, and we also have resources to prove it. Like, right? We have our consciousness, and then we could figure out how things change with the internet and so forth. So I think now is like the most incredible time for it to become obvious to us, and I think what's also making a difference is where we are. Where our solar system is in the galaxy. I think that's making a difference. Like, I think there are all these things we're going to learn in the future that are all part of like the humanity, like waking up. But I believe it's always been there. It has to have always been there. Sure. Maybe sometimes to a greater extent or a lesser extent. We're just now just identifying it more.
So you just brought up the point about where we are in the universe. From your original shifting timeline, when you first were like in 2013, what arm of the solar system were you in?
Definitely Sagittarius. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I am too. Now there is a woman over in Europe. Her name is Ashley. She's with Reality Sliders Mandela Effected.
Okay.
So look up her channel. I'll also send you a link to her channel later on.
Please.
She's got long black hair. She typically wears glasses. Her name's Ashley.
Okay.
We're still trying to connect with her because of the huge time differences. But right. She claims, and I don't disbelieve her, that she is from Orion, not this Orion, but from an alternate Orion that is further away from where Earth is currently located, and that's highly possible. But she's one of the first people that I ever saw online that's not coming from the Sagittarius thing. And the only point that I was making to her, because I sent some text messages back and forth with her, was there's probably a lot more that are from Orion, and perhaps maybe a different belt altogether too. There may be something though with all of us who are Sagittarius arm original as to how outward we are. Because you and I are talking, and there's people like Chris who are online, SMQ AI, a lot of guys who are Mandela affected, and all of us are from the Sag arm originally. And all of us are putting ourselves out there, right? Right. Without the fear of the repercussion. And that, I think that's more, that probably speaks maybe more to us and how we were originally. But there's potentially millions of people around the world that are affected, and either they don't have the access to the technology like we do here in America and over in Europe, or you know, again, if they're from the Sagittarius arm versus the Orion arm originals, is perhaps they're just a little more feared of coming out there, a little bit more feared of putting it out there and online. So yeah, that's the big movement right now for a lot of us who have been doing this for a while, is trying to get people like you. That's why I thought it was so awesome when you actually replied to me. We're like, hey, let's have a Skype conversation. I'm like, yes, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, and then so many times too, people, there's like so many, like you talked about the earrings and so forth. There's so many personal Mandela effects. One just happened to me literally yesterday morning. I go into my shower to take a shower. I have like a custom built shower, and I'm standing against the wall because where the water's coming out, and I'm like, where my shower is now shifted. Like I'm almost like touching the wall and I've been taking the same shower for 10 years. I knew where the shower head was, and now all of a sudden it like moved 3 inches to the left. And I'm like, so there are always these little personal things that pop up too, where it's like, all right, I must be crazy because I physically can see where it is. But when you become aware of these things, then everything becomes, that could be a Mandela effect, that could be a Mandela effect, etc. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's since we settled on, my wife and I had settled on that these changes are real. And again, like I said, we noticed for a long time, individually, but never wanted to say anything to each other for fear of my spouse and her thinking of me, thinking that the other one of us is batshit crazy. Right.
Right.
So we're like, okay, so for years we were picking up on these weird things and these changes, and you think that those things are like, well, am I going crazy? Is something going on? Am I overstressed? What is happening?
Right.
And then we finally talked about it when I stumbled online, kind of like what you did. I stumbled across the Mandela Effect. Someone was talking about the Berenstain. It was the Berenstain Bears, and the Queen song. We noticed a lot of things like the Queen song.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the ending where it just drops off now instead of having the continuation. And to your point about the whole flip-flop thing too, right? It seems like some things do and some things don't.
Right.
And it's completely randomized what it is. And that's the other reason why I say it's a continuance of movement through. If you think in quantum physics and quantum entanglement and string theory, right? There's a infinite amount of universes, and in general, they can all have such very subtle changes that no one in general would even be aware of them. And probably your conscious is always phasing through these multiple strings and these multiple realities. But now that we're awoken and aware of what's going on, and I think maybe CERN had something to do with kickstarting us, kind of going back to what you were saying too about, we made a decision as a reincarnation point to come in and say, okay, I'd like to at least experience so many years. But perhaps what happened with CERN was when they started messing around with the particle colliders, that it actually forced an early awaken for most of us. Because I'm in my late 40s. I don't know how old you are, but my wife is in her late 40s, but we're different ages, and our son is younger. And then we've talked to people that are in all different age groups, from up in their 60s and 70s to down into their 30s, and some in their 20s. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that it was a fully 100%. I want to become aware at 20. I think, again, CERN somehow kickstarted that, unbeknownst to them, even perhaps.
Yeah, they definitely are doing something, and I think when it becomes more well known, whatever it is, it's all going to make sense. And I think part of it, I've heard things about different timelines and how there's something called what I'll call the graduation timeline, and how they're trying to keep things into a certain timeline. And so they're bringing things back together so that this group of people that are behind CERN, the Rothschilds or whoever it is, are staying with this particular timeline that's supposed to be the winner of all the different timelines. Because I know there could be infinite timelines, but I know that a lot of them that are way out on the fringes, I think they just kind of fall away. But I think there are still a lot of major ones that are all in play, and we have different versions of ourselves, obviously, in these other timelines. But we're in a timeline where we, like, the version of us what would we call that? Our I am technology, so that we're the main version of ourselves, and we've been moved into this timeline because we're the best version, the best of the best, so that this particular timeline works. Because this goes into teachings by the Hopi Indians. They talk about something called the four teacher worlds, basically four versions of a hologram that ended in disaster, and we're in what's called the fifth world of peace, which means we're in the version that actually makes it. And the reason we make it is all of the best versions of us are being put onto this particular timeline. A lot of what I just said, I don't really know depth in detail, but these things come to me and they start to resonate with me as well. And then why there are Mandela effects too. So this will sound a little interesting, but I have a housemate that lives with me. His name is Sean Bond. So he lives with me and my boys, and he's also a psychic, and he's a very interesting psychic. I almost think of him like an ET in a human body. If you hear him talk, he talks.
He might be.
Yeah, he might be. Yeah, like us all, right? But he talks at a very high level, and he pulls in information. It's really interesting. So I would have these conversations with him about Mandela effects, and he would read into them. And what I began to realize is that there's always a reason for a Mandela effect. So a lot of people are like, oh my God, why does Hitler have blue eyes now? Like, I remember him always having brown eyes, brown hair. It was kind of ironic that he's advertising the Aryan race with blonde hair and blue eyes when the leader has brown hair and brown eyes. And now our reality, he's got blue eyes, So why would that happen? Well, let's say you could stitch together parts of the hologram, and there's another version out there where he had blue eyes, and you realized if you brought that into this particular version, it would make him a more potent. Did I break? I think I just left you. I'll wait for it to come back. See if we can get this back here.